Sirens ripped through the night at Fort Hawthorne. Cadets stumbled from their bunks, red lights flashing across concrete walls. Somewhere inside the base, doors slammed, cameras cut, and shadows moved where no shadows should be. In the chaos, two women sprinted down a corridor, one a medic turned cadet, the other her only ally. Their weapons drawn, their breaths sharp, chasing a figure who knew every blind spot. When they caught him, what they found wasn't foreign tech, and that meant only one thing: the enemy wasn't outside the gates. It was already here. Before we dive into the story, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The file was never meant to be seen. A folder sealed in a forgotten vault of the Pentagon, locked for 15 years, marked with a single phrase burned into its cover: Specter Wolf. No rank, no medals, no ceremony, only a call sign. For years it lay untouched, gathering dust under fluorescent light, until one morning, a clerk sorting outdated archives pulled it from the wrong shelf. The seal cracked, the spine opened, and inside were coordinates, coded reports, and a name no one expected. That name would ripple outward, across quiet corridors, across Fort Hawthorne, Virginia, and into the life of a woman who thought she could disappear into the ranks unnoticed. The morning drill field was sharp with winter air. Cadets lined the courtyard in perfect rows, boots scraping against the concrete as instructors barked commands. It was a place where hesitation was punished and arrogance thrived. Naomi Vance stood at the far end, late 20s, posture locked straight, uniform precise. She was a transfer, freshly pulled from the medic division, now thrown into leadership training among cadets who had spent years climbing here. Her silence drew attention more than her presence. Some whispered as they passed. Others laughed outright. The kind of laughter that cuts sharper because it hides no fear. Why is she even here? One muttered, loud enough to sting. Lieutenant Eric Dalton approached with the swagger of someone convinced he was the chosen future. 26. Broad smile turned blade. Arrogance polished through privilege. He stopped just short of her, making sure the circle of onlookers could hear every word. Transfer. Huh, he said, lips curling. Naomi kept her chin forward. Sergeant Vance. Not here. You're not. Dalton snapped back. Here. You're just another cadet trying not to drown. The chuckle behind him grew. Someone whispered about sympathy points. Another joked about medic hands too soft to grip a rifle. Naomi didn't blink, didn't give them the rise they wanted. Her silence was read as weakness, but it was something else entirely. Because Naomi Vance had long ago learned that noise was cheap and silence could weigh heavier than stone. By midday, the jokes had spread like wildfire. Dalton retold the exchange to anyone who would listen, embellishing the details, mocking the way she corrected him. The mess hall carried laughter that seemed to follow her like an echo. She ate in quiet corners, eyes lowered not from shame, but from calculation. Every face, every reaction. She filed away with surgical precision. Evening fell with fluorescent glow over the locker room. Dalton leaned against a bench, replaying his morning insult in a high-pitched parody of her voice. Cadets around him howled, one swearing she wouldn't last another week. At the far end of the room, Naomi unlaced her boots slowly. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritual, folding her uniform neatly into the locker. She never looked their way. That was when Corporal Marissa Cole noticed it. A patch slipped from Naomi's folded jacket, fluttering to the floor between them. Marissa bent to pick it up before anyone else noticed. Her eyes froze on the fabric. Gray, edges frayed with years, but the words stitched in black thread were unmistakable. Specter Wolf Unit. The name punched something loose in her memory. She had heard it whispered in late-night briefings, never explained, only avoided like a ghost story officers didn't want to tell. Her breath hitched, just for a second. Naomi reached out, calm and steady, and took the patch back without a word. No explanation, No attempt to hide the fact she had been caught. She slid it inside her jacket, locked the door, and walked out with her head level. Marissa said nothing, but she couldn't shake the echo of those words. Specter Wolf. 2 weeks slipped by. Training drills hardened. So did the mockery. Dalton made sure of it. During a live combat exercise, he called across the field, voice booming. Careful. Vance, don't bruise those medic hands. The laughter that followed wasn't as unanimous as before, but it still stung. Naomi didn't look at him. Her eyes weren't on Dalton at all. They were scanning the ridgeline, narrowing slightly as if she saw something the others missed. Later, when the field was empty, she walked the perimeter alone, boots crunching on gravel. Her fingers brushed the cold chain-link fence as she traced its edge. She stopped at a corner where the woods pressed close. The camera above her had flickered that morning, just for 2 seconds. Almost no one would notice. But she had. From her pocket, she drew a battered notebook, its spine worn thin from years of use. She wrote a time, a location, a note in shorthand symbols. Then she closed it and kept walking. Inside Fort Hawthorne, cadets crowded into the mess, buzzing about exams and drills. Naomi kept her distance, but her eyes saw more than they let on patterns in routines, blind spots in security, cracks no one else bothered to check. That night, when the barracks lights dimmed, she sat on her bunk cross-legged. The notebook lay open across her lap, filled with coordinates, diagrams, lists written in her precise hand. Her pen hovered, then marked another entry, camera F2. 2-second drop. To the cadets, she was background noise. To Dalton, she was a target. But in truth, Naomi Vance was mapping every weakness of the base as if it were instinct. Outside, wind pressed against the glass panes. The barracks creaked. Inside, Naomi closed her notebook, slipped it beneath her pillow, and leaned back against the wall, eyes unblinking. At the same time, in a facility miles away, encrypted servers flagged the same flicker she had noted. A protocol buried deep within Pentagon systems stirred for the first time in over a decade. Automated alerts rippled upward into clearance levels most officers never even knew existed. The words appeared briefly on a console. Specter Wolf protocol reactivated. And far from Fort Hawthorne, someone important would soon see it. But here, in the quiet dormitory, Naomi sat motionless. She looked like any cadet at rest. Yet in her stillness was the calm of someone who knew the storm was coming and had been waiting all along. The strategy hall buzzed with chatter as cadets filed into their seats. Screens glowed across the front wall, waiting for the lesson to begin. Lieutenant Eric Dalton leaned against the podium, grinning as if the room belonged to him. Naomi Vance sat near the back, notebook closed, pen clipped neatly to its side, her posture unreadable. Beside her, Corporal Marissa Cole glanced nervously toward the front, sensing tension ripple beneath the surface. The lights dimmed. An instructor tapped the projector console, preparing to load tactical maps, but the system froze mid-screen, static flashing white across the wall. A low chime cut through the silence. A single line of text appeared on the display, letters sharp against the dark. Specter Wolf, stand by. Gasps whispered through the room. Some cadets laughed uncertainly, thinking it a glitch, but Naomi's tablet, resting on her desk, vibrated once. She looked down. No sender, no subject line, only the same words glowing across her screen. Her chest tightened, but her face stayed stone still. Marissa noticed. From her seat a row ahead, she caught the flash of Naomi's screen. Her lips parted, breath stalling as recognition sparked. This wasn't random. The instructor scrambled at the console, pressing override commands. Nothing worked. The words lingered, pulsing slowly before vanishing as the screens went black. Dalton laughed, loud enough to fill the silence. Guess the medic learned how to hack, he said, shaking his head. A few chuckled, but the sound was uneasy. the kind of laughter hiding uncertainty. Naomi didn't respond. Her fingers tapped once against her knee, controlled, steady, then returned to stillness. When the lights rose again, the lesson resumed as if nothing had happened. But Naomi knew better. That message wasn't for the room. It was for her alone. That night, long after taps, she sat cross-legged on her bunk. The barracks were silent except for the steady hum of heaters working against the cold. Her notebook lay open on her knees, filled with meticulous lines of shorthand. She wrote down the timestamp of the override, cross-referenced it with the flicker from camera F2, then added a set of coordinates scribbled in faint pencil, the kind only insiders could recognize. A pattern was emerging, not random, not coincidence. Something was moving in parallel to her presence here, something buried deep inside military systems. She flipped a page. There, in precise rows, symbols of radio call signs and encrypted unit codes stretched down the paper. One sequence repeated twice, Wolf's 01. Naomi paused. Her eyes lingered on the ink, the familiar mark of an authorization she thought had been dead for years. She drew a slow breath, steadying her hand before closing the book. Far from Fort Hawthorne, a different facility hummed under fluorescent light, a classified operations center, its walls lined with glowing monitors, its air thick with the tension of secrets. Colonel Jonathan Reeve leaned over a console as an alert flashed across his screen. The message was clear. Specter Wolf protocol reactivated. For the first time in over a decade, the dormant code had stirred. Reeve froze. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing at the text pulsing against the dark background. Then, with no hesitation, he reached for his cap and strode from the room. Orders snapped behind him as aides scrambled to follow. But Reeve didn't wait, because he knew exactly what that call sign meant and who it belonged to. At Fort Hawthorne, dawn broke heavy and unsettled. Clouds pressed low, mist rising from the ground like smoke from unseen fires. Cadets gathered with unease they couldn't name. Conversations carried no laughter. The strange override from the night before hung like a shadow over every word. But Dalton strutted through the crowd as if nothing had changed. He stopped in the courtyard, voice loud and mocking. Hope the medic enjoyed her little light show, he said, smirking. This time only a few chuckled, and even they sounded forced. Naomi stood at formation, her gaze fixed forward. She didn't flinch, didn't break stance, but Marissa, watching from her row, saw Naomi's hand clench once, then relax. A silent rhythm of control. Inside the lecture hall later that morning, cadets shuffled into rows with a tension that pressed the air thin. Naomi slid into her seat at the back, Marissa a few desks ahead, Dalton already lounging near the front. The instructor prepared to begin. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. A low murmur spread as the room dimmed into total darkness. 7 seconds passed in silence. Boots scraped as cadets shifted uneasily in their chairs. When the lights snapped back on, the central display glowed with a single notification. Not a map. Not an error. Incoming call, Colonel Jonathan Reeve. The text flashed in bright white, stark and undeniable. Every cadet fell silent. Then it began the echo of footsteps down the corridor. Steady, deliberate, boots striking marble like a drumbeat of authority. The double doors swung open. A figure stepped through, broad-shouldered, his chest lined with ribbons. His presence alone silenced the hall without a single word spoken. Colonel Jonathan Reeve had arrived. His gaze swept the room like a blade, cutting through rows of cadets who suddenly sat straighter. Then his eyes found Naomi Vance. For the first time since setting foot in Fort Hawthorne, Naomi shifted in her seat, not from fear, from recognition. The storm had reached the base, and with it, the past she thought buried. Specter Wolf had been called to stand by once again. Colonel Jonathan Reeve stepped into the hall without a word. The doors shut behind him with a heavy echo, sealing the silence like a vault. Every cadet sat frozen, the weight of his presence pressing down on the room. His eyes scanned slowly, deliberate as a searchlight, not over the rows, not over the podium. They locked directly on Naomi Vance. The air changed. Dalton's grin faltered for the first time. Marissa Cole straightened in her chair, pulse quickening in her throat. Reeve moved forward, boots striking in measured rhythm, his chest lined with ribbons, his face carved in stone. He stopped at the center, turned his head only slightly, and spoke. Specter Wolf. Stand by. The words detonated like thunder in the silence. Chairs creaked as Cadet stiffened unconsciously. Dalton blinked twice, unable to mask his confusion. Naomi stood. Not hurriedly, not nervously. She rose with precision, boots clicking once against the floor as she stepped into the aisle. The room held its breath as she walked forward. Eyes followed her, whispers dying against the silence Reeve had drawn. She stopped in front of him, back straight, gaze unwavering. Reeve's expression softened, just barely. Good to see you again. Specter Wolf. Gasps broke in the back rows. Dalton leaned forward, muttering under his breath. This has to be a stunt. But Reeve turned, voice cutting like steel. Lieutenant Dalton, at ease. You've said enough. Dalton's jaw snapped shut. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced with something colder, uncertainty. Reeve let the silence expand before speaking again. You think you know who sits beside you. You think you understand rank, medals, or privilege. He shook his head once. You don't have a clue. The cadet stared, transfixed. Marissa's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Naomi remained still, but her eyes carried the weight of recognition only she and Reeve shared. Reeve drew a slow breath. 7 years ago, he began. A covert extraction was ordered classified, unauthorized at Raven Hill. 14 Marines trapped behind fortified lines. Rescue teams failed. The mission was declared lost. The hall was silent but for his voice. Every commander gave up. Every door closed, except one. A 4-person team entered. No air cover, no backup, no chance of survival. He paused, letting the memory scrape the air. 52 minutes later, all 14 Marines walked out alive. Gasps rippled like a current across the rows. Reeve's voice sharpened as he turned to face Naomi fully. She commanded that team. Dalton's mouth fell open. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his chair. Marissa's eyes widened, realization flooding her face as the patch she once held flashed in her mind. Reeve took one step closer. She didn't just earn that call sign, she built it. Specter Wolf exists because of her, and on that ridge, she saved my life. The weight of his words crashed across the room like a hammer. The cadets shifted unconsciously, sitting taller, spine straightening. What once looked like a transfer, a medic, an outsider now stood as legend-made flesh. Every whisper, every joke burned back through their throats like ash. Dalton forced a laugh, desperate. I didn't know who she was. No one told us. Reeve cut him off with a voice low but lethal. That's the point. Lieutenant, you didn't ask. You didn't want to know. The silence that followed was sharper than any rebuke. Dalton swallowed hard, his arrogance bleeding into nothing. Reeve turned back to the cadets. Remember this moment, because leadership isn't about the loudest voice. It isn't about mocking what you don't understand. Leadership is standing when no one else will. His gaze swept every face in the room. A chair scraped. One cadet near the back rose slowly, heels snapping together, hand lifting in a perfect salute. Then another followed. Within seconds, the sound of boots echoed across the floor as rows of cadets stood. Salutes cut the air in flawless unison. Arms sharp, eyes forward. A wall of respect formed, pointed toward Naomi Vance. For the first time at Fort Hawthorne, Naomi stood not as an outsider, but as the one they all now recognized. Specter Wolf. The legend they had mocked in ignorance now walked among them. She didn't smile, didn't nod. Her silence carried more weight than any acknowledgement. The room held steady, Hundreds of salutes raised in rigid respect, but Reeves stepped closer, lowering his voice until only she could hear. They know now, but this isn't about them. Naomi's jaw tightened slightly. Then who is it about? Reeves' eyes hardened. Someone's watching this base. Someone who shouldn't be. The warning sat between them, sharp and undeniable. Naomi's fingers curled once at her side, then loosened. Her gaze didn't move from his. It begins again, she whispered. Reeve gave a single, grave nod. Around them, cadets still held their salutes, unaware of the shadow looming just beyond their respect. The silence was reverent, but under it, Naomi felt the storm building. For the first time in years, Specter Wolf had been called back into the open, and someone, somewhere, was already waiting for her return. The alarm hit like a blade through sleep. Klaxons rolled across Fort Hawthorne, red strobes pulsing through barracks windows. Security breach internal. South wing. The PA barked. Naomi Vance was already on her feet. Boots slammed to tile. Jacket snapped shut. Sidearm checked in one motion. Across the aisle, Corporal Marissa Cole grabbed her carbine and fell in behind. Hallway lights strobed red, white, red. Shadows jumped across cinderblock walls, long and sharp as knives. Somewhere below, metal doors thudded into lockdown. They cut left past the training bay. A blast of cold air pushed from the stairwell as the pressure system kicked in. Naomi raised two fingers, then pointed down maintenance level. The stairwell smelled of oil and dust. Sirens muffled as the door banged closed behind them. Only the hum of generators remained, low and steady like a warning. Marissa checked the corner, breath tight. Motion sensors tripped east corridor, she whispered. Naomi nodded once and moved. Footfalls soft, rifles high. The corridor narrowed, grates overhead rattle-ticking with the HVAC cycle. Somewhere close, a faint click grazed the silence. Naomi froze and tilted her head. Not a relay, not a pipe. A safety selector eased off safe. Contact, she breathed. A shadow unpeeled from a service alcove, dressed in matte black, face hidden under a balaclava. The muzzle of a suppressed weapon flashed like a blink. Rounds snapped past the cinder block. Marissa dove to cover, sparks bursting from a pipe flange. Naomi stepped into the lane and fired twice, controlled and exact. The figure rolled, fast and practiced. He sprinted down the corridor and punched a keypad on a maintenance door. It parted just enough for him to slip through. Naomi hit the jamb with her shoulder before it could seal. Metal groaned and rebounded. Marissa slid in after, covering the flank. Inside was a service tunnel lined with conduit and cable trays. Emergency lights glowed a dim amber, turning everything the color of rust. The intruder glided through like he knew the route by heart. He tossed a cylinder behind him and kept running. Naomi recognized the ridge pattern before it landed. Flash, she barked and pulled Marissa into a doorway. White detonated, then vanished. No heat, no blast, only a wall of blind. They counted 2 heartbeats and moved. Vision returned in shards. The intruder climbed a ladder well and kicked the hatch. Naomi holstered, grabbed the rails and climbed hard. She reached the top as the hatch swung. His elbow flashed back at her face. She drove forearm to forearm and felt bone. He lost balance just enough. Marissa wedged the hatch with her boot and hauled herself up. Naomi hooked the intruder's wrist and torqued it over the lip. He hit the steel deck with a breathless grunt. The suppressed pistol skittered away. He rolled to recover, lightning fast. But Naomi was faster. A heel pinned the weapon hand. A palm strike crushed his shoulder flat. "Don't," she said, quiet as a blade crossing stone. He stopped moving. Marissa snapped cuffs on with a practiced click. They pulled him to his knees. Breathing hard, he stared through fabric eyelets with no fear, only calculation. Naomi patted him down, methodical and cold. She found a compact device taped under his vest plate. Ceramic housing, overspec protection. On the rear, a faint laser-etched micro-serial. Marissa leaned closer. "That's not off the shelf. Naomi turned it in her palm and felt the cold answer. Department of Defense procurement tags, milled off but not clean. Firmware port hidden under a rubber seal, keyed to a domestic loop. Blue team hardware, repurposed black. This isn't sabotage, Naomi said. Then what Marissa whispered, a timing probe. Someone's measuring us. Footsteps hammered the hallway. MPs flooded the landing, rifles up, eyes wide. Naomi raised an open hand and pointed down the ladder. 2 doors unsecured, corridor east still open. She said, contain and sweep. Close the flank. Her voice stayed level. The room obeyed. They dragged the intruder through the hatch and into the brighter hall. He watched everything while seeming to watch nothing. Every exit, every camera dome, every badge light. Mask off, an MP ordered. The man turned his head away, like sunlight hurt. Naomi shook her head and stepped in close. She peeled the balaclava up and paused. A face in that bland, forgettable range between 30 and 40, cheek scraped, hair clipped, eyes that cataloged, not pleaded. No unit patch, no dog tags, no name. Take him, Naomi said. Quiet room, no chatter. They hustled him down the line and vanished through the security door. Marissa exhaled for the first time. Her hands trembled and then steadied on the carbine. What kind of probe plants a device like that, she asked. The kind that knows our playbook, Naomi said. The kind that wants to see how fast we wake up. She tucked the ceramic unit in an evidence sleeve and sealed it tight. Command burned with light when they entered. Monitors crowded every wall with maps, feeds, and status blocks flipping from red to amber. Colonel Jonathan Reeves stood at the center, both hands on the edge of the ops table. Naomi set the sleeve down. The device clicked softly against the plastic like a muted metronome. Reeves didn't touch it. He studied its weight without lifting his hands. Army origin, he asked. Domestic hardware repurposed, Naomi said. Serial shaved. Firmware keyed to internal logs. Not foreign, not freelance. Reeves' eyes narrowed. What did he hit? Cameras, doors, perimeter alarms only enough to draw us? Naomi said. He never went near the armory. Testing response time, Marissa added. Testing command handoffs. Testing that we notice. Reeves' jaw worked once, then stilled. This wasn't an attack, he said. It was a rehearsal someone else wrote for us. The room went very quiet, as if waiting for the floor to move. A side door opened slowly. Lieutenant Eric Dalton stepped in, shoulders slumped, voice stripped of edge. His eyes flicked between Naomi, the device, and the red thread of alerts across the screens. I was wrong, he said, words raw in his throat. I didn't ask. I didn't look. Naomi met his eyes and cut it clean. Now you understand, she said. No triumph, no warmth, just a line drawn across a map he had never cared to read. Dalton nodded once, as if accepting a verdict. He stood back from the table and fell silent. In that quiet, he finally looked like an officer learning, not a boy performing. Reeve turned to the ops board. Lock down non-essential traffic. Audit keycard logs. Pull every frame from F2 through F6, he said. Route the detainee to a black interview room team of 2. No ranks announced. Marissa glanced at Naomi. Who writes a rehearsal like this and walks away? Naomi's gaze slid to the evidence bag and held there. Someone with keys to our doors, she said. Someone who wants us wide awake before the real thing. Reeve didn't disagree. Hours bled toward dawn. The alarms tapered to quiet, then to a low system hum. Rain arrived in sheets, steady and cold against the parade ground. Naomi stepped outside under the eave. Water slashed through the floodlights, carving silver threads out of the dark. The base looked washed and new and still somehow older. A diesel idle rumbled from beyond the motor pool. She followed the sound along the awning until she reached the corner. A boxy truck sat under the shadow of the fuel shed. Lights off, engine whispering, no unit markings. License plate bracket empty. Tarp tied down tight over a load line that didn't match any manifest. The driver watched the gate through a slit of glass. On cue, the Sentry shack light flicked green. The truck rolled, slow and patient, like it had all the paperwork in the world. Naomi noted the tire pattern, the missing mud flap on the right, the taped mirror. The rear brake pulsed once before the turn, a stutter no mechanic would call normal. She filed every detail where she kept things that mattered. The truck slipped through the gate and merged with the rain. Its tail lights smeared into the wet road and vanished beyond the trees. No one on the yard seemed to see it go. Bootsteps approached behind her. Reeves stopped at her shoulder and watched the empty gate. "Not ours," he asked. "Not ours," she said. He didn't ask how she knew. He understood that answers sometimes arrive as patterns, not words. They stood in the rain without speaking. Around them, the base breathed a slow exhale after adrenaline. Inside, teams ran audits that would take days, maybe weeks. Naomi slid her hands into her jacket pockets. The ceramic device waited in evidence, cold and patient as stone. Somewhere, a copy-logged response time blinked green for someone who should never see it. She turned toward the open yard. Water tracked off the bill of her cap and broke on the concrete in neat little circles. Her voice, when it came, was even. "Specter Wolf is back," she said. "And this time the enemy isn't beyond the wire. It's standing right here with us."